Well, good evening, everyone. We're glad you're with us tonight. Ricky and I are continuing our weekend consideration of moments in the life of Jesus. In fact, we're calling this a day in the life of Jesus. You know, one thing we've talked about a lot is that in the midst of all the things we've faced, how incredible would it be if we could sit across the table with Jesus? What would he say in times like this? What help and what comfort could he give us in the difficult times that we're facing? And that's what we're able to do through this weekend, is to spend a moment, just a moment in the life of Jesus, to breathe in some hope and some comfort from the Gospels. And so tonight we're going to Luke chapter 21, and we're going to consider some helpful instruction from the Master. It may not seem like that at first. In fact, as we begin to walk through this section, it may seem like this is not the passage to look to for a message of hope and comfort. But I think, as you'll see, as Ricky and I are walking through this section, there's a great deal of help for difficult times found in the message that Jesus gives to his apostles about the difficult times they're facing. Ricky, what welcoming words would you like to wish to everyone tonight?
Well, I'm just glad that everybody can join us. And I was thinking, as you said, what can Jesus do help us about these times? I'm thinking, wouldn't it be nice to have him sitting across the table during a peaceful time?
Yeah.
And the encouragement that would come from a peaceful time.
That's right.
As well. We often think of him in critical times, but wouldn't it be nice just to have a meal with him and, just shoot the breeze with him, say, how's life, and tell us what's going on.
That's absolutely right.
That'd be a nice, interesting thing in the day of Jesus. Yeah, I sure am glad people can join us tonight, and I look forward to doing this with you.
Absolutely. That's one of the most incredible things about this. This is our second time to do this sort of a format of presentation, of study. And it's rich to be able to not to show you how we look at the text, but for myself to be able to talk with Ricky and to learn with him and to spend this time with one of my treasured mentors. Luke 21 is a chapter that deals with the destruction of Jerusalem. He's trying to help the disciples then, especially the apostles, to understand what was coming. There's no question. God already had it in his mind that he was going to destroy the city. But tonight our purpose, our goal through the study is not so much to break down everything about the destruction of Jerusalem, but rather to pull out some principles about how people are to cope in a time of crisis. There was a crisis that was threatening these disciples. It was impending. It was coming. And so in the midst of the crisis, in the midst of this chapter dealing with the crisis, there are principles that Jesus gives that applies to every time of crisis, of every time of difficulty. And so the principles involved here, they're not peculiar to the destruction of Jerusalem. They're not unique to that specific issue. They are things that apply to every difficulty and every situation that people find themselves in. And so what we're going to do tonight is pull out some principles that can help us to face times of crisis. Ricky, lead us into the very first thing we find here. What is one of the principles, the first principles you see as we walk through?
Well, let's begin in verse 7. And so it said, they asked him, saying, Teacher, when will these things be? And what sign will there be when these things are about to take place? So the disciples are having this time with him. They want to know, tell us more about what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So he says, take heed that you be not deceived, for many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and the time is drawn near. Therefore do not go after them. But when you hear of wars and commotions, do not be terrified, for these things must come to pass first, but the end will not come immediately. And then he said to them, nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There'll be great earthquakes, various places, famines, pestilences, and there'll be fearful sights and great signs from heaven. Let's stop there. When you read this, it sounds a lot like our world today.
Yeah.
But the thing is, there's never been a part of man's history when there hasn't been nation against nation. Never been a time where there haven't been earthquakes, when there hasn't been famines.
Sure.
But the key thing that he's telling them about here is he's describing something that is way off. It's not touching them. It's something that it's in another country, would say.
Yeah.
And it doesn't touch us personally. And we say, well, that sure is bad. I'm sure I'm sorry they have to go through that, but sure. It doesn't touch us.
No.
And so here he's just kind of setting the scene for them about where he's going to go to. And each increment that we go to, it becomes more personal for them. And so, as we leave this section, when we see all this stuff that's been going on in the world, and always goes on in the world, and he said, you're going to see all this, but that's not it.
Yeah.
These things, these wars, these commotions, these famines, all that's not it. But
Yeah.
beware. So then he begins in verse 12. But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and prisons, and you'll be brought before the kings and rulers for my name's sake. So pause. Notice it's become more personal now.
Yep.
Now it's not in some other country. Now it's in my city. And now they're coming and they're getting me.
It's me. Yes.
They're coming to get me. But the people that are coming to get me are the people that we invest a great deal of trust to execute justice properly.
That's right.
And so we don't expect someone to come and arrest us when we're innocent and doing nothing wrong.
That's exactly right.
And so here you have these magistrates that are going to come, and they're going to take you.
Yes.
And then he says, but for verse 13, it will turn out for you as the occasion of testimony. Therefore settle in your heart not to meditate beforehand on what you will answer. For I'll give you a mouth and wisdom which all your adversaries will not be able to contradict or resist. Let's stop there. Here's the first principle to survive a crisis. And he says, therefore settle it in your hearts not to meditate. Now, as we read that in English, what it sounds like is he's saying, don't meditate. That same language is used in Matthew chapter 6
Yes.
when he talks about don't worry and all this stuff.
Correct.
And so what he's saying here is make up your mind and get it settled and don't worry about it. And so the first thing he tells them here is you have to settle some things beforehand.
Yes.
And just as a sidebar, that was the key to Daniel's success. He had purposed in his heart he wouldn't eat the king's meat or drink the king's drink. So back on task, he said there's some things you're going to have settled beforehand. The thing is, if we don't get something settled beforehand, when the time comes and the crisis comes, it'll be a time of emotion and we'll decide, but most likely we'll decide what is wrong.
It's too late at that point.
But here he says, before this happens,
Yeah.
settle this in your mind so you don't have to worry about this. What you're going to do. I'm going to give you the words, but settle in your mind what you're going to answer. Get this fixed, how you're going to respond. That is a reasoned response, not an emotional response.
Yes.
And that reasoned response will enable us to respond more successfully than from an emotional response. And so what he's telling you here is don't wait till the crisis comes to decide what you're going to do or who you're going to be. When the crisis comes, you've already decided how you're going to behave. You've already decided what you're going to do and who you're going to be.
I love that point. You know, I've read somewhere where someone said that crisis or storms, they don't produce character, they reveal character.
Right.
You might say they don't produce faith, they reveal faith. And so the thinking is, it's not that you're looking for these times, these difficult times to then become faithful,
Right.
to become diligent. They are revealing whatever is inside of you at that time. And so I love the point you're making of before the storms arise, right? Before the clouds are in the horizon, you're making up this kind of person, this kind of faith, this kind of commitment, even before they come. There's some kind of a dedication in your mind you're making today that's going to prepare you for when they come. Walk us through maybe some application. Here he's talking about seeing the storm clouds of specifically the trial of Jerusalem and the hardship. But what might be some ways we could pull some application to us today, some specific application?
Two, I would pull just for time's sake. You know, when the challenge comes to whether we're going to tell the truth or a lie, we've already decided what we're going to do. We're going to tell the truth. We're not going to reason if I do this, then this is going to happen. We're not going to reason from the consequences. We've already decided we're going to be truth-speaking people. We're not going to lie. That's settled. I'm not going to lie. I don't care what the circumstance is. I'm not going to lie. People who have settled in their heart they're going to be truth speakers don't have to worry about when the time comes whether they're going to lie or not. They've already got it settled in their mind. I think there are people whose character is so strong that lying to them is as foreign to them as it is for me and you to sprout wings and fly like a bird.
I think you're right.
It's not that they cannot.
Right.
It's that they will not.
Yes.
They will not lie. I think of my dad. Lying is as foreign to my dad as us to spread wings and fly like a bird. My dad's going to tell the truth whether you want to hear it or not, and he's going to tell the truth when it will cost him.
Yes.
He's got it settled in his heart. That's the kind of character he's going to have. The second thing I think that's good for young people to think about. We've got to decide whether we're going to maintain our moral purity or whether we're going to be impure. You know, if we wait until the moment when the hormones are raging and the passions are hot in the back seat of a car to decide how we're going to respond to that moment, there'll be a response.
Yep.
It'll be an emotional response, and more than likely it will be not a good response.
The wrong response, that's right.
And so we have to settle beforehand. We're going to keep ourselves pure. We're going to be moral people. We're not going to be immoral. But that doesn't just apply to young people.
Yeah.
How many times do older people find themselves in a pickle or a difficult situation because they haven't decided beforehand what they're going to say and what they're going to do?
That's right.
And they find themselves in an immoral atmosphere and commit an act of immorality. We have to get this settled beforehand. It's not difficult. We just have to make up our mind. We're not going to eat the king's meat and drink the king's drink. We're not going to allow ourselves to become immoral. We're going to remain pure.
Maybe a contrast, because I love the analogy you're putting here. So you have the young man in Proverbs 7 who's walking down the street, going downtown, and everything happens, and he's just going moment by moment, and he's hooked, like a fish on the lure.
He's called a simple man.
Yeah, simple-minded.
He didn't even fall off the turnip truck. The turnip truck hadn't even come to get him yet.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. I haven't heard it that way. Yeah, but then you look at a contrast with Joseph.
Yeah.
There he is,
There it is.
in the moment. He didn't have to think about it. He didn't have to reason it through.
I'll not sin against God.
The master's wife offers, and it was decided.
Yeah.
And so there it is, right? You know today, whenever
Yeah.
the storm comes, this is who I am.
Yeah.
This is the decision I'm making.
Yeah.
And so Jesus is using that in the mindset of trial and hardship.
Yeah.
These are coming, but you're going to have this mindset that when it comes, it's not going to catch you off guard. But boy, to live with that kind of a way of thinking, even before the temptation arises, I already know what I'm going to decide. That make a big difference.
We have to have some vision about things. We have to be looking ahead.
Yeah.
You know, we don't have to look 10 years down the road. All we got to look is 150 feet down the road because that's as far as the headlights will show.
That's exactly right.
And we just look as far as the headlights will show and we'll deal with that. But we've got something settled we're going to be and going to do. We're not going to allow ourselves to become unclean by lying or becoming immoral. We're going to maintain that kind of character. And we've got that settled. It's fixed.
You know, a passage we've used a lot already this year in different teaching avenues, sermons and classes, is 1 Corinthians 15:58. Steadfast, immovable, abounding. It's that idea. It doesn't matter what the temptation is or what the storm is. We've already settled our roots. We've already laid the foundation. This is who we are. Come what may. Joy or pain. Love that idea. Do you have any thoughts before we move on to the second principle?
No, let's move on to the second one.
What's our second principle as we're looking through this context?
Let's begin now in verse 16. He said, you'll be betrayed by even parents or brothers, relatives, and friends, and they will put some of you to death. Now pause. Look at the progression. At first, it's a tremendously macro, general situation. It's not touching me.
No.
Famines, earthquakes, pestilences, they happen somewhere else. They don't happen in my world. Again, I look at that and I say, oh, I feel bad for those people, but it doesn't bother me.
Sure.
Then, the second thing, it becomes more personal. Because now the people that you invest your trust to adjudicate law fairly and rightly have betrayed you.
Yes.
But now then, it becomes even more personal.
Yes.
Now it's not wicked judges.
Right.
Now it's not the world at large.
Or it's kings.
Now it's people in your family.
Yes.
Who know you the best, who know all your skeletons, know all your flaws, and they're the ones that betray you.
That's right.
So then he says, you'll be hated for my name's sake, but not a hair of your head will be lost. But by patience possess your souls. Here's the second principle.
Okay.
By patience possess your souls. Now, patience is an interesting word.
Yeah.
You know, we tell our kids, you just need to be patient. Or we were told, you need to be patient. Patience has time to it.
Yes.
You know, if I put my hand on a cold stove for 30 seconds, that's not too long.
Okay.
But if I put my hand on a white hot stove for 2 seconds, that's about 2 seconds too long.
That's correct.
In other words, patience is a word that goes with a burden. And it often has a time frame to it. Patience is not a word we use when the wind's blowing in our back.
Yeah.
Patience is used when the wind's blowing in our face, when everything's against us. And look at here. Here your family's going to be against you. And so he says, in patience, possess your souls. The idea of patience here is you're going to have to bear up under this. It's not going to be easy. When all this stuff happens, we're going to talk about in a moment, to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
It's not going to be easy for you, but you've got to already have your mind made up. This is what I'm going to do, and you have to be able to endure that. You know, I've seen this in my life, and I'm sure others have seen it. You teach somebody the gospel, and man, they're just as hungry as they can be in the beginning, and they take off like a house of fire. I mean, they will know the whole Bible in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And you're so enthused for them, but just as quickly as they shoot or burn up like a burning house, they also burn out. What we're in is a marathon. We're not in a 50-yard sprint.
That's a good analogy.
We're in a marathon.
That's right.
And in this marathon, not everything is always going to be favorable for us. There's going to be a crisis or crises. There's going to be adversity. And in patience, you bear up, you possess your souls. Don't be like that house of fire that burns up as quick and burns out just as quickly. We're involved in a marathon. And what's going to happen in Jerusalem is not going to happen immediately, all at one time. It's going to be a process.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you here, because two thoughts within here. So one, the coupling or the pairing, one thing so many people say is, I wish I had more patience.
Yeah.
But patience is paired with adversity.
Trial,
right? Consider all joy when you encounter various trials, realizing the testing of your faith produces endurance. And so if I really do want a patient spirit, or I feel like that's something I'm missing, here's the path.
Right.
The path is in the storm. The path is in the wind. And so that pairing of patience and adversity is important to learn now.
Right.
That's how patience is developed. But then to kind of finish what you just said there, so Jesus is pointing them to this idea of this, what's coming, realizing, and that's the point you're making here, it's not going to end in a day.
Right.
In fact, it's not going to end in a week.
Right.
What really is the point there, Ricky? Because I didn't let you finish that, about when Jesus is saying, hey, this is coming, but you're going to need a patient spirit, realizing what was to come. Finish that thought.
This circumstance is going to toughen you.
Yeah.
It's going to put some calluses on you that are going to be positive. You know, when I was a kid, my dad has always been a gardener. Still is at age 94. But at the house we lived in Denton had windows across the back. The room, the den area had been added onto the house, and there were windows in the back.
Yeah.
2 sets of windows. And Dad, these little Dixie cups.
Yeah.
Dad would save the Dixie cups every year, and he would fill the Dixie cups with potting soil. And he would plant his tomatoes, and he'd leave them there on the windowsill.
Okay.
He'd water them judiciously at the right time. He watched them and watched when they began to grow. And he nurtured them as they grew. Now, in the garden itself, there were some tomato plants coming up.
Sure.
But they were what is called volunteer tomato plants.
Okay.
When my dad planted the ones from the Dixie cup into the garden, along with the volunteers, he'd watch the news at night. And if the weatherman said, okay, it's going to be kind of a harsh, cold night, he also had half-gallon milk cartons that were hard plastic. The top would fold open, and you'd fold it back, but Dad would cut the bottom out.
Oh, my.
And then open the top.
Okay.
He'd leave the top open during the day for the tomato plant he transplanted to get the full sun.
Wow.
If the weather was going to be harsh, he'd go out and he'd close the milk top.
Yeah.
Next morning, he'd go out and he'd open it back up so he could get its full sun. He never put a milk carton around a volunteer tomato. And the reason is because that volunteer tomato had already been toughened by its environment. And the point about that is, in patience possess your souls, we are not hothouse tomatoes. We live in an environment that is going to be trying for us. We're not going to be hedged about and protected.
Yeah.
But in patience possess your souls. And what's going to happen in AD 70, that's what they're going to need. We don't live in a hothouse. God doesn't protect us. Hedge us about that. Adversity is going to come. Loss is going to come. And what he says is, you're going to have to be acclimated to the environment you live in. Not so acclimated you become so callous you don't care, but so you can bear up, so you can have patience to bear up.
It's an amazing analogy.
Yeah.
I didn't know your dad was quite a gardener too. That's
Yeah.
Well, let's leave a marker here for a moment and go over to Romans chapter 2. I love that principle of the toughening of the spirit, the callousing, if you will, the toughening, the strengthening of the spirit. In Romans 2, there's a description found in verse 7. Let's read it together, and I'd like to get your commentary on this. So in Romans 2, in verse 7, it talks about those to who by perseverance in doing good seek for glory and honor and immortality, eternal life. He's describing a kind of spirit here, a kind of characteristic of a kind of heart. How do you see this fitting with what you're describing and this toughening or the patience, enduring of a spirit?
The New King James reads just a little bit different.
Sure.
It says, eternal life to those who by patient continuance in doing good seek for glory, honor, immortality. Patient continuance. We're not giving up. Patient continuance. In Luke chapter 8, in Luke's part of the parable of the sower, in the fourth of the soils, he said, this soil brings forth 100-fold, bearing fruit with patience. The idea of patient continuance, the idea of bearing fruit with patience is we don't grow up overnight. And we're not going to be acclimated overnight, but we continue patiently, seeking to do good. We don't change our mind. We don't change our path. We don't let the burdens direct us a different way. In patience, possess your souls. Patience bear fruit. It takes patience to be able to grow up.
Well, let me grab that for a second and ask you a question. So you take within what Jesus is saying, and he's looking across the table and he says it to us today. What is he telling us?
Well, the first thing he might tell us is, you really got a silver spoon in your mouth.
Compared to this. That's absolutely right.
So,
yes.
Kind of like the Hebrew writer told the Hebrews, you haven't even stumped your toe yet and you're about to quit.
That's right.
That might be one thing he says.
That's right.
But I think what he would do, he had such a compassionate heart for his disciples.
Yeah.
And he would know our hearts.
Sure.
And knowing our hearts and our thoughts, he would be able to address those hearts and thoughts in such a way that it would just enable us to bear up. It would just kind of make us soar, because here's the Savior that's come and talked to us.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing would then increase our vigor to be patient. And so I think the Lord would just kind of give us a shot of good vigor to help us bear up. And hopefully that's what we can do for one another.
Absolutely.
And this patient continuance doesn't just apply to what we're talking about. It also applies to parenting.
Okay, how so?
Well, from birth or period of adoption to maturity, there are going to be a lot of trying moments as a parent.
Amen.
There are times in which it might be more merciful, not lawful, just to pinch their head off. But, you can't do that.
That's right.
But you have to continue patiently.
Yeah.
Because you bear fruit with patience. You bear fruit with those children with patience. Another point, that's also good for shepherds.
Yes.
With sheep who are struggling. They don't grow up overnight. They bear fruit with patience. And so that just goes on and on and on, Jordan.
Well, with preach the word with great patience.
That's it.
Maybe I don't want to belabor our point. We need to go on to our third point here, but maybe just to put a ribbon on here. You think of what Jesus is saying, and he's calling them to patience, realizing this isn't going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah.
But that's not a source of discouragement.
Right.
Realize the good that can come out of this. And so rather than looking to the end of the storm, look at the end result of yourself, of your soul, and what can come out of this, no matter how long it lasts.
Right.
And I think there's great comfort there.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's going to go away today. It could get worse than what it is today.
Right.
But look at what can happen.
Yeah.
Look what God can do through here. All right, let's get to our third point as we're walking through here. What's the third principle?
Well, let's begin with verse 20 and read down through verse 28 together. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know its desolation is near. Okay, so let's pause. So now that the first part he says, this is not it. But when you see this, settle in your heart, because things going to happen to you with people you trust, but then people are going to betray you. But now he says, when you see the armies of Jerusalem surrounded, you know the desolation is near.
Yep.
That's a key point to keep in mind.
Yes, it is.
Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her depart, and let not those who are in the country enter her. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe to those who are pregnant, to those who are nursing babies in those days. For there'll be great distress in the land and wrath upon his people. They will fall by the edge of the sword. They'll be led away captive to all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. There'll be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars on earth, distress of nations with perplexities. The sea, the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them from fear and the expectation of those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud and with great glory. Now, when these things begin to happen, look up. Lift your heads, because your redemption is near. It gets more personal. Because now in verse 26, it's not my family betraying me. It's not the judge betraying me. It's not something going on in the world. Now it's my own heart betraying me. My own heart fails. I fail because now my heart fails. Yeah. And so he says the key is you got to look up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is near. That verse 28 ties back to verse 20, because he said, when you see the armies of Jerusalem coming. Now in this, he in verse 23, he's talking about pregnant and nursing. He's not saying it's bad to be pregnant.
Sure.
But this is a time in which you need to flee to the mountains.
Got to get out.
And you don't need any extra weight or encumbrance.
Sure.
And if you're at 9 months and you're about to give birth, your ability to flee is going to be challenged.
It's going to be hard to run fast.
And if you're a young mother and you're nursing a child, it's going to be a little hard to flee to the mountain as rapidly as he says while you're nursing a child.
That's right.
So he's not saying don't nurse and don't be pregnant.
Sure.
What he's saying is he's using those as figures for us to say, don't let anything weigh you down.
Yeah.
And here's what happened. You had two groups of people.
Okay.
You had the Jews who were looking, and what they were looking for was restoration.
Walk that through a little bit. What were they looking
They
for?
wanted the kingdom of David restored, and if he's the Messiah, he's going to restore it.
Okay.
The second group of people were people that had their heads lifted up and looking for the redemption. Josephus tells about the gates of the city when the Gentiles began to come down out the hills into Jerusalem, that the gates blew open. Now, they were not hollow core doors like we have at the back of the auditorium where a good breeze would blow them open.
Sure.
They describe gates as just tremendously thick and large. When those gates opened, that one group of people who thought he was going to restore David's kingdom weren't looking for what they should have been looking for. And when the Gentiles came down upon them, their hearts began to fail them. It was a judgment, and they weren't ready for that judgment. But there was another group of people who, when they saw it, said, this is what we've been looking for.
Yeah.
This is the day of our redemption. We're fleeing to the mountains. Now, what's different? Is one group dumber than the other? No, it's what they were looking for.
That's right.
One wasn't looking for the redemption that was going to come and view the destruction of Jerusalem as a time of redemption. They were looking for it as a time of great triumph and a great victory. Okay, he's going to come and he's going to feed us with fish and loaves again.
Yep.
He's going to put food in our mouth. It's going to be great like in the days of David and Solomon.
The days of old.
But instead it was a time of judgment. So the third thing is you have to watch.
Okay.
You have to watch.
What are we watching for?
You have to be ready. You know, Paul will use the analogy, the Lord comes as a thief in the night.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's interesting here. Let me go look at something else real quick.
Sure.
When he says there'll be signs in the sun, the moon, the stars, and earth, distressed nations, there'll be signs you're going to see.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell sometimes when the last frost has come.
Okay.
A fig tree doesn't know straight up from backwards about when the time of frost is. The fig tree will put out buds, and the frost will come, and they'll drop them. But you got West Texas.
Okay.
And you have those mesquite trees.
Yes.
A mesquite tree / bush will not bloom until the last frost.
Okay.
And all the old farmers out there know it.
And they know it.
And so they don't plant till the last frost.
Yes.
Second thing, you know the signs. You can see it happening. You go up on the Cap Rock out in the Panhandle where Lubbock is at.
Yeah.
There's nothing to stop the wind and the sand.
Yeah.
But old farmers know when they look off in the distance and they see it bright red, that's not the sun reflecting against the horizon. That's a sandstorm coming, and you better get yourself in. And you better have yourself protected. Now, the point is, you can see signs, then you can prepare for this.
Okay.
If we have the sense enough to be able to see the signs or see when the last frost is, they said, surely you can see this and know the time is coming. Some did and some didn't.
That's such a rich point, Ricky J., because when you look at the two verses, verse 26 and verse 28,
Yeah.
there's a lot of people today living in verse 26. They're not looking for Jerusalem.
Yeah.
They're not looking for King David. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of people who are looking to some false hope today.
You know, I don't want to present this as though I got this all figured out practically.
Sure.
I've got it figured out up here. I don't have it all figured out practically. Because I'm as susceptible as anybody else when a crisis comes to melt as well. And so I don't mean to, when I'm talking about this, to say, okay, this is all going to be easy.
Sure.
Now, when you have a crisis come that shakes your foundation,
Yeah.
I mean, it shakes you to the core. It challenges you with everything that you believe and in whom you put your trust.
Yeah.
That's when you have to remember this. That's when you have to remember you've already got some things settled.
You're so true.
And we're going to have to bear up under patience. And we can't let our heart fail. And this one is the one that gets us the most because it's so personal.
So much so.
And it's just so easy, Jordan, to be overwhelmed by it.
Well, I was wondering about that because it seems like the difference between 26 and 28, the difference between fear and faith has everything to do with what we have our eyes on.
What we're looking at,
Our hope.
our hope.
How many people have their
Lift
hope
up.
in their...
Look up and lift up your head.
Absolutely. Their eyes are on either their
Yeah.
wealth or this past year in politics.
Yeah.
And then when it fails them, they're full of fear.
Yeah.
The gates are open. The enemies are here. And this is not the Savior I was looking to. But if we see
Yeah.
through the storm, and that's the interesting thing in verse 28, right?
Right.
Everything you're saying, the doors are still open. The enemy is still there.
Yeah, the scene hasn't changed.
Nothing
the
in
setting's
there
the
has
same.
changed, except
Yeah, except
they knew what was to come.
this was what they were expecting.
It's what they were expecting.
It was the day of their redemption.
What a difference. And to think
Yeah.
about that, maybe if we're pulling something tangible here, for us to get some hope here, is to set our eyes on the right thing.
Yeah.
Deliverance is not about the things here on earth, right? It's not about the temporal idols we look to, or even maybe to say it this way, it seems like what we're looking in verse 28 and what you're calling us to with this watchfulness is a greater trust in the promises of God.
Absolutely.
Right? Trust
Yeah.
in what He says. Trust in
Absolutely.
God's timing, trust in God's purpose,
Yeah.
and in His promises.
Yeah, that's good.
Yep.
That's good.
We need to get to our final principle,
Yeah.
but I think that was such a rich point, and I
Yeah.
think it's worth consideration for everyone tonight, just to look at those two people from verse 26
Yeah.
and 28, and where are you fixing your hope? Where are you fixing your eyes? Is it on Jesus? Is it on His promises? Let's get to our last and final.
The last one, I'll just abbreviate for time. It says, verse 34, but take heed to yourselves lest your hearts be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, cares of this life. The day come upon you unexpectedly, for it will come as a snare on all those who dwell on the face of the earth. Watch therefore and pray always, that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man. So the third one bleeds into the fourth one. Lift up your head, watch and pray. That word watch is a term that men in the military will appreciate. It's a term for the sentinel. The sentinel is set on watch. And the sentinel can't turn his back, he can't close his eyes. He always has to have his eyes open, his attention attuned sharply.
Yeah.
Because the enemy is waiting for the opportunity to have a breach in his attention. He can't sleep on post. He can't run from his post. You got to stand your post. In fact, Paul will say in Ephesians 6, having done all to stand, withstand and stand therefore.
Stand therefore.
And then he gives the way you armor yourself. But the last thing he says is pray.
Pray.
Why is it that for God's people, The last thing we often turn to is prayer.
The last resort.
When people in the world who may not know anything from Genesis to Revelation,
Yeah.
the first thing they do is say, well, we're going to pray to God. Prayer to God ought to be the first thing, not the last thing we do.
That's right.
We can't sit and figure it out ourselves.
No.
It's already happened. But we're going to have to pray. So he says, you don't close your eyes. You watch and you pray. Be praying people.
Praying people. And you think about that. Think of all the things that would apply to a moment like this. In the moment of crisis, the importance of prayer. What did James say? If anyone lacks wisdom, pray. So if you don't have answers, go to the one who does.
Yeah.
Or Paul's statement, if you're full of anxiety, pray.
Pray.
And there's going to be a peace you will find. There's so many powerful things, but maybe the greater thing, the watchfulness and praying, what if we lived, that watchfulness, that sobriety, we lived as if the people who just spent time before the throne of God?
Well, that'd be tremendous.
What a difference it would make.
Or what if we lived as though it was going to come the next minute?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Help us on the way.
Yeah.
Well, Ricky J., so many rich thoughts came from here.
Yeah.
Let me ask you just to wrap the whole thing up. So we have Jesus' instruction, so many rich principles about times of crisis, especially realizing, to a point you made earlier, the depth of this crisis. I don't think there's been a moment historically that would quite compare to the destruction of Jerusalem and what it meant to the people then, spiritually and physically. We're pulling it to us today, and things that we have faced and some difficulties. How would you wrap all this up? What would be a good conclusion for what we've seen here?
Well, first I would just review, settle in your heart, and patience possess your souls, lift up, watch and pray. Those four things. And they're things we have to think about and practice all the time. We have to ingrain them in ourselves.
Yeah.
If by patience we're going to produce fruit, then we have to ingrain these kind of principles into our life so that when these moments come, they'll be in place. It won't make the pain less. It doesn't take the hurt away. It won't resurrect the loss. It won't rebuild a house. Okay? But it'll put things in a perspective for us. It'll put things in a perspective because of the one in whom we put our trust.
That's a rich way, maybe to even say that this way, to put a Twitter tag for us. It won't weaken the storm, but it'll strengthen the soul in the storm.
There you go, yeah.
What do you think of that?
I like that.
Well, this chapter reminds us there's a lot we can't control.
Yeah.
They couldn't stop this from happening.
All this was outside them.
It was outside their control.
Except for verse 26, when their hearts failed.
And maybe that's a better thing. You can't control the storm, but you can control yourself.
I'm the only one I can control.
And how you respond.
Yeah.
I think that's a great place to end there tonight. How will you respond to the crisis? Will you be at verse 26 and allow the uncertainties to fill your life with fear? Or will you ground yourself in the promises of God and to look up and to see the redemption He has promised?
And this was a day in the life of Jesus with His disciples.
Just one day.
Yeah.
One instruction.
Yeah.
But what a difference it can make for us today.
Right.
Would you end us with a word of prayer?
Sure. Our good and great God, we're so thankful that You love us. We're thankful for the great provisions that You've given us, for the wonderful promises that lift us up. And dear God, may we be a people who settle in our hearts so we don't worry when the opportunity comes that we're tried. May we be a people that endure with patience and be a people who have our eyes fixed on the day of redemption and be a people who constantly watch and pray. Dear God, You've given everything to us in Your word that we need to be strengthened. Help us to be better students, and dear God, help our faith to grow, to be strong enough to move mountains. And dear God, when those times come, we know You'll be there. We pray, dear God, we'll remember that You're there. In Your Son's name, amen.
Amen.